For 10 years, Thomas Okonkwo sent every spare pound back to Nigeria, believing his cousin was building the family home they'd sketched on a napkin. But when he finally returned with 40,000 pounds and a suitcase full of London chocolates, the land was still raw bush, and his mother was cooking over a kerosene stove in a rented room behind a mechanic's shed. The dream house never existed, and the cousin who'd promised to build it had cashed in 10 years of lies. Thomas Okonkwo was a construction worker in London, working long days so his widowed mother in Enugu could have a real home. Every month he wired money to his cousin Chidi, a man he trusted like a brother. But Chidi wasn't building anything. He sent progress photos stolen from stranger sites and pocketed every pound. Now Thomas must answer one question. Had 10 years of backbreaking labor only funded a thief's double life and left his own mother to suffer in silence? The night before Thomas Okonkwo left for London, he sat with his widowed mother at a wooden table and sketched a house on the back of a napkin. 4 bedrooms, a deep veranda, tiled floors, a borehole for clean water. He traced the lines with the stub of a pencil, while his mother, Neoma, watched with soft, tired eyes. She had sold her sewing machine to help buy his plane ticket, and the weight of that gift sat between them like a holy thing. Thomas folded the napkin into his pocket and made a promise. Every pound he earned across the ocean would rise into walls, into a roof, into a place she would never have to leave. The land on Abakaliki Road had belonged to his late father. It was a half-acre of red earth fringed with stubborn grass and a rusted gate that had not been touched since the funeral. Thomas's cousin Chidi volunteered to manage the construction. He had always been the one who knew how to talk to contractors, the one who answered questions before you finished asking them. With a firm handshake and a voice full of conviction, Chidi said, "Go and work. I will treat this land like my own." So Thomas went. He landed in London with a nylon bag and a head full of hope. And he found work on construction sites where the cold crawled under his fingernails and the concrete dust turned his spit gray. He shared a rented room above a kebab shop, slept on a mattress that sagged in the middle, and ate meals standing up because there was never time to sit. But every month, the moment his wages cleared, he walked into a wire transfer office and slid pounds across the counter with a prayer. The receipt always carried the same memo: for the house, make mama proud. A week later, a photo would arrive on his phone. A foundation trenched deep in red soil, a block wall rising to waist height, a roof frame silhouetted against a clean blue sky. Chidi always found the perfect angle, always sent a voice note to match. "You see, bro? Progress, your mother will be dancing." Thomas stared at those images during his lunch breaks, letting the sight of half-built walls refill something the construction sites had hollowed out. But the photos were not from Abakaliki Road. They were stolen from neighbors' projects, downloaded from builders' social media pages, captured on afternoons when Chidi drove his new car past real homes going up for real families. The voice notes were recorded in hotel bars where Chidi ordered rounds for strangers while wearing imported shoes. None of the money touched the land. It vanished into bank accounts, into weekend trips, into a life Chidi had decided he deserved. He gave Thomas's mother a few wrinkled notes every other month, just enough to keep her from calling her son with questions she was too ashamed to ask. In London, Thomas walked past churches on Sunday mornings and heard hymns that sounded like home. He closed his eyes and imagined his mother sitting on the veranda he had drawn on the napkin, humming the same songs into the warm Enugu evening. That image became a physical thing inside his chest, stronger than exhaustion, stronger than the loneliness that sometimes pressed him into his mattress and held him there. He survived because he believed a house was rising on red earth. Then, after 10 years, he made a decision. He would not send another wire. He would carry his savings home in cash, 40,000 pounds sealed in an envelope, and walk through the front door of the house he had built. He told no one he was coming. He wanted to see his mother's face when she opened the gate, but when the local taxi turned onto Abakaliki Road and his eyes found the same rusted gate leaning into the same wild grass, untouched by a single block or a single brick, The air in his lungs turned to stone. The house was not there. It had never been there. And in the distance, a figure moved behind a mechanic's shed. An old woman with his mother's shape, cooking over a kerosene stove. Thomas stood frozen at the edge of Abakaliki Road, his hand still gripping the taxi door. The woman behind the mechanic's shed moved with the careful, stooped rhythm of someone who had long stopped expecting comfort. She stirred a small pot over a kerosene stove, her wrapper faded, her feet bare in the dust. Every image Thomas had carried for a decade, the veranda, the tiled floors, the proud face of his mother standing at her own gate, shattered into a single truth: the house was a ghost. He walked toward her, his heart beating in his throat. She did not look up until he was close enough to touch. When she did, the ladle slipped from her fingers and clattered against the pot. Neoma Okonkwo stared at her son as if he were a spirit, her lips forming his name without sound. Then her hands flew to her face, and a cry broke from her chest. A sound more animal than human, a decade of suffering pushed through a single breath. Thomas fell to his knees in the dirt and wrapped his arms around her thin shoulders, and for a long moment, neither spoke. The kerosene stove hissed between them like an accusation. She pulled back and looked at him with wet, searching eyes. "My son, you came back. But the house, she could not finish." Thomas pulled the folded napkin from his pocket, the same napkin he had kept in his wallet for 10 years, now soft and yellowed, but still legible. He opened it between them. "Mama, I sent money every month, every single month, for this." He pointed at the sketch as if it were evidence in a trial. Neoma covered her mouth. "Chidi said it was small money. He said you were struggling, that you could only spare a little. He gave me 2,000 naira here, 5,000 there. I did not want to complain. I thought you were doing your best." A cold, quiet fury began to replace the shock in Thomas's veins. 2,000 naira, less than £5, while he had been wiring hundreds every month. He helped his mother to her feet and led her to the rented room behind the shed. It was a single space with a thin mattress, a plastic chair, and a pile of cooking utensils stacked in a corner. The walls were bare concrete, the floor cracked, the air heavy with the smell of old kerosene and shame. His mother sat on the edge of the mattress and hid her face. "The neighbors know," she whispered. "They know my son went to London and left me here like this. I stopped going to church because I could not bear their looks." Thomas's jaw tightened. He opened his phone and scrolled through the decade of wire transfer receipts. Each one bore the same recipient, Chidi Okori. The memos read like a prayer: for the foundation, for the roofing, for Mama's borehole. The total clawed its way toward £96,000. Neoma looked at the screen with eyes that could not comprehend the numbers. "I never saw this," she said, her voice breaking. "He came sometimes in a fine car, smelling of beer and perfume, and told me not to worry. He said you were building a future, that soon you would come home with a big house. I believed him because I wanted it to be true." Thomas stood and walked to the doorway, staring at the rusted gate in the distance. The land was still there, his father's land, but only weeds and silence had grown on it. In his mind, he replayed every voice note Chidi had sent. "The bricklayers are working fast, bro. Your mother will be greeting guests from her veranda by Christmas." He had heard those words in a cold London room and felt warmth spread through his chest. Now they curdled into poison. Chidi had not just stolen money, he had weaponized hope, manufacturing a parallel life that existed only in photographs. He went back to his mother and knelt before her. "Mama, did Chidi ever show you papers? A land document? Anything with your name?" She thought for a moment, then reached under the mattress and pulled out a crumpled envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a flimsy document with a notary stamp that looked official but could not hide the truth from Thomas's practiced eyes. The document stated that Chidi Okori had been granted power of attorney over the Abakaliki road plot, signed by Neoma with a thumbprint she did not remember making. Thomas's stomach turned. He had been fighting property fraud in London for a decade, reviewing documents on high-end construction projects. He knew a forgery when he saw one. His cousin had not only drained the funds, he had legally stolen the land out from under them. This was the pivot that split the story in two. Until now, Thomas had been a victim of theft. But with that paper in his hand, he became a hunter. He asked his mother where Chidi could be found. She hesitated, ashamed, then finally whispered, "He drinks at the Sunset Bar every evening." He owns it now, they say. Thomas's eyes narrowed. Owns a bar. On his money. He tucked the forged document into his jacket, kissed his mother's forehead, and promised to return. Then he walked toward the road, his footsteps heavy with purpose. The Sunset Bar sat on a noisy corner in central Enugu, its neon sign flickering against the deepening dusk. Thomas walked through the open door and scanned the room. Laughter floated above the clink of glasses. A soccer match played on a wide television, and in the back, near a private booth, sat Chidi Okori. Thicker, smoother, draped in a designer shirt and surrounded by friends who felt important by association. He was ordering rounds of expensive whiskey, the kind Thomas had seen only in duty-free shops he could never afford. When Chidi saw Thomas, the laughter died in his throat. For a long second, the two cousins stared at each other across the bar. One a man who had spent 10 years in concrete and cold. The other a man who had spent the same decade turning sacrifice into luxury. Chidi recovered quickly, standing with open arms and a practiced smile. "Brother, you are back. Why didn't you call me? Let me get you a drink." Thomas did not move. He pulled out his phone and placed it on the table, the screen showing the bank transfer history. Then he laid the forged power of attorney document beside it. The booth went silent. Chidi's friends melted away without a word, sensing the shift in air pressure. Chidi glanced at the documents and laughed a thin, hollow laugh. "What is all this?" he said, voice suddenly too high. "You come to my place with papers like a policeman? After everything I did for you?" Thomas leaned in close, his voice low and sharp. "You built nothing. You stole photos from other people's progress. You fed me lies while my mother lived in a shed. You made her sign away my father's land with a thumbprint she doesn't remember." He tapped the forged paper. "This is not a family matter anymore, Chidi. This is a crime." Chidi's face cycled through emotions, shock, denial, and then a cold smirk. "You think anyone will believe you?" he said, settling into a posture of smug defiance. "I have friends in land registry. I have receipts. I paid workers. The house you wanted was too expensive. I used the money for other family needs, for your mother's health, for her food. She is alive, isn't she? You should be thanking me." The casual cruelty of the lie sucked the air from Thomas's lungs. He wanted to swing, to shatter the whiskey glass and everything in it. But he remembered his mother's face, and he chose something more dangerous: patience. He leaned back and said, very quietly, "You own a bar. You drive a new car. You wear imported shoes. You took nearly 100,000 pounds from my hands and gave my mother 5 pounds a month to keep her quiet. You forged her signature and sold my father's land out from under us. And you will pay for every single one of those things." Chidi's smirk flickered. He opened his mouth, but Thomas was already walking away. The forged document back in his jacket, the phone buzzing with one new message: his mother, calling from a borrowed phone to ask if he was safe. Thomas stepped onto the street, his heart pounding, his mind already racing ahead. He had confronted the thief. Now he needed proof irrefutable enough to bring Chidi down, legally, financially, and in the eyes of every family member who still thought of him as the reliable cousin. That meant finding the real builders whose photos had been stolen, the notary who stamped the fake power of attorney, the bank accounts where the money had really gone. And he had to move fast, because the document in his pocket meant Chidi could sell the land at any moment, or worse, that a buyer already had a deal in motion. As the Enugu night closed around him, Thomas Okonkwo began to plan. This was no longer a story about a stolen house. It was about saving the very ground it was meant to stand on. The next morning, Thomas returned to his mother's rented room carrying a notepad and a cold determination. He asked Neoma simple questions. Had Chidi ever brought a contractor to the land? Had she seen a single load of sand, a single bag of cement arrive on Abakaliki Road? Her answer was the same to every question, a slow, defeated shake of the head. No one had touched the land. Not once. Thomas wrote everything down, then asked who else in the neighborhood might have witnessed the truth. Neoma mentioned a retired bricklayer named Mr. Emeka, who lived 3 doors from the family plot and watched the world from a plastic chair on his porch. Thomas found Emeka exactly where his mother described, a thin old man chewing a toothpick with the slow patience of someone who had seen too much to be surprised by anything. When Thomas introduced himself, Emeka's eyes widened. Okonkwo's son? The one in London? Thomas nodded. Emeka removed the toothpick and leaned forward. Young man, I have been sitting on this porch for 12 years. I have never seen a single block laid on your father's land. One time a man came with a camera, took pictures of my nephew's house next door, and drove away. Was that your builder? Thomas's jaw tightened. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through the progress photos Chidi had sent. Emeka squinted at the screen. That wall there, that is Pastor Obi's house 3 streets away. I laid those blocks myself. And that roof, that belongs to the Ibekwe family. That house was finished 5 years ago. Thomas stood very still. Until that moment, he had understood Chidi's betrayal in terms of missing money. Now it became a meticulously constructed fraud, a decade-long theatrical performance performed for an audience of one. Chidi had not stumbled into a few lies. He had scouted real construction sites, captured their progress at the right angles, and imported them into Thomas's life like a director editing a film. The voice notes full of updates, the contractor quotes, the photos of completed bathroom tiles, all of it was scripted, stolen, and weaponized against a man working himself to exhaustion in a country thousands of miles away. Thomas thanked Emeka and asked one final favor. If it came to a legal matter, would he testify? Emeka tapped his chest. Your father was my friend. I will say what my eyes saw and what my eyes did not see. Thomas wrote Emeka's phone number beside his mother's witness statement and moved on to the next target, the builders whose identities could be verified from the stolen photos. Tracking down Pastor Obi and the Ibekwe family took 2 days. Neither had any idea their homes had been used in a long-running fraud. When Thomas explained the situation, both agreed to provide sworn affidavits confirming the completion dates of their houses and the fact that no construction ever took place on the Okonkwo land. The Ibekwe matriarch, a formidable woman named Grace, added a detail that stopped Thomas cold. Your cousin Chidi came here 5 years ago, very friendly, asking if he could take pictures of our new roof. He said he was a contractor building his own business portfolio. I didn't think twice about it. Chidi had been charming strangers into unwittingly aiding his crime. With the photo evidence debunked, Thomas turned to the forged power of attorney document. He took it to a legal aid clinic in Enugu, where a young lawyer named Adalbi studied it under a lamp. She pointed to the notary stamp and date. This stamp belongs to a notary named Jude Okoli. His office is in the Old Market District. But there's a problem. Thomas leaned forward. Adalbi tapped the document's registration number. This number does not match the format used by the Enugu Land Registry in the year this was supposedly filed. Either the notary made a serious clerical error, or someone created a fake number to make the document appear official when it was never recorded. Thomas's heart accelerated. A fake registration number meant the document's entire legal foundation was a fabrication. He thanked Adalbi and immediately headed to the land registry to pull the official title records. What he found there shattered the last fragile hope that Chidi had merely been incompetent. The title to the Abakaliki Road plot had been transferred out of Neoma Okonkwo's name and into Chidi Okori's name 11 months ago. The transfer was processed using the same forged power of attorney document, but the registry's own file contained a letter from Neoma confirming the sale. A letter written in crisp, formal English that a woman who barely spoke 10 words of English could never have composed. The clerk behind the counter confirmed something worse. A new application for building approval had been filed under Chidi's name just 3 weeks prior. The plan attached to the application showed not a family bungalow, but a 2-story commercial building with retail shops on the ground floor and rental apartments above. Chidi had sold the dream of a home and replaced it with a profit center, designed to generate income for himself long after the initial theft was complete. The construction permit was pending final approval, and once issued, a bulldozer would clear the land and a new concrete foundation would seal the crime forever. Thomas requested certified copies of every document in the file. The clerk hesitated, but Thomas pulled out his UK identification, his father's original deed, and the forged power of attorney. "I am the son of the rightful owner," he said, his voice low and steady, "and I am about to report a felony to the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission. I need these records now." The clerk disappeared into a back office and returned 20 minutes later with a sealed envelope. That evening, Thomas sat on the floor of his mother's rented room, spreading the documents around him like a map of betrayal. The bank receipts, the witness statements, the affidavits, the forged documents, the registry records, the fraudulent building application. The case was ironclad. But as he organized the evidence, his mother said something that opened a door he had not even seen. "Chidi's younger brother, Emeka, came to see me last year. He told me he was sorry. He said his brother had changed, that the money had made him wicked. Then he disappeared." Thomas looked up. A brother with a guilty conscience. If Emeka could be found, he might know where the stolen money was hidden, or worse, how much land Chidi had already sold. Thomas added a new name to his list. The hunt was expanding, and the clock was ticking. The registry clerk had mentioned the building permit could be approved as early as the following Monday. Thomas had 3 days to stop the bulldozers and drag the truth into the light, before his father's land was paved over by a liar who never looked back. Thomas found Chidi's younger brother, Emeka, hiding in a one-room flat on the outskirts of Enugu. The place smelled of damp concrete and regret. Emeka was thin and restless, his eyes darting to the door, as if expecting his older brother to walk through it at any moment. When he saw Thomas, he did not run. He sat down heavily on a wooden stool and covered his face with both hands. "I knew you would come," Emeka said. "I told myself you would find out, and when you did, I would tell you everything. I am tired of carrying his sins." Thomas did not sit. He stood in the center of the room, arms folded, waiting. Emeka looked up with the hollow expression of a man who had spent years hating what he was afraid to stop. "Chidi has been selling small portions of your father's land to different buyers for years," he said. "Not the whole plot at once. He would carve off a piece here, a piece there, always to people who didn't ask too many questions. He kept the title intact by telling the buyers the paperwork for their section was still processing. He made millions of naira, the bar, the car, the women, all of it from your land and your sweat." Thomas absorbed this with a frozen calm. The theft was even more systematic than he had imagined. Chidi had not just stolen the land, he had been slowly dismantling it, piece by piece, like a butcher selling cuts of meat from a stolen animal. Emeka continued, his voice cracking. "I helped him falsify 2 of the receipts. I am not innocent. But when I saw your mother cooking behind the mechanic's shed, I could not sleep. I went to her and said I was sorry, but I was too afraid to tell you the truth until now. My brother has become a dangerous man. He has connections in the land registry and the local police. If you move against him publicly, he will try to bury you." Thomas pulled out his phone and recorded everything. Emeka flinched but did not object. He gave dates, amounts, names of buyers, and the location of a storage unit where Chidi kept duplicate documents. When the recording stopped, Thomas looked at Emeka with a mixture of contempt and pity. "You will swear before a lawyer to everything you have just told me." Emeka nodded. "I will. I must. I cannot carry this anymore." That same afternoon, Thomas delivered the complete evidence file to the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission office in Enugu. The investigator, a weary-eyed woman named Mrs. Okpara, listened without interruption as Thomas laid out the bank transfers, the forged documents, the witness statements, the fraudulent building application, and the recorded confession. When he finished, she leaned back in her chair and said, "This is one of the cleanest cases I have ever seen walk through my door. Give me 24 hours." The next morning, a temporary injunction was placed on the Abakaliki Road plot, freezing all sales, construction permits, and title transfers until a full investigation could be completed. Thomas drove to the land and stood at the rusted gate one more time, this time with a court order in his hand and his mother beside him. Neoma touched the gate with trembling fingers. "Your father bought this land with money he saved for 20 years, she whispered. "I thought I would die here in shame. Now I can lift my head." Thomas put his arm around her shoulders. "We will build the house, Mama. Not just the one on the napkin. A real one, with your own hands watching it rise." But the legal victory was only half the battle. The same evening, Chidi was arrested at the Sunset Bar. According to witnesses, he had been laughing with a woman at the bar when plainclothes officers approached. His smile dissolved into panic as the handcuffs clicked. He shouted that Thomas was a jealous liar, that he had only ever helped the family, that the documents were fake. The officers walked him past his own customers, past the staff he had employed with stolen money, and into the back of a waiting vehicle. The bar emptied within 20 minutes, its neon sign buzzing over an empty room for the first time in recent memory. Thomas received a call from Mrs. Okpara the following day. "He confessed," she said. "Not out of remorse, but because we showed him your brother's recorded statement. He tried to negotiate, as if he still had something to offer. We are charging him with fraud, forgery, elder abuse, and money laundering. The land will be returned to your mother's name." The words landed in Thomas's chest like a physical weightlifting. He stood outside the rented room and watched his mother inside, packing her few belongings into a plastic bag. Soon she would move into a temporary apartment he had found with clean water and 2 rooms and a small garden. The house on the napkin would come, but first she would have dignity. Then came the final surprising detail, something no one expected. When investigators opened Chidi's storage unit, they found not only the duplicate documents and fraudulent receipts, but also a metal cash box. Inside the box was a stack of unopened letters, each one addressed to Thomas in Neoma's handwriting. They had been mailed to a post office box Chidi controlled, intercepted before they could ever reach London. The letters were full of quiet desperation. "My son, the roof is leaking and I am afraid, my son. Your cousin brings little, my son. Do not worry about me, but I miss you." Chidi had not only stolen the money and the land, he had stolen a decade of his mother's words, leaving her son to believe she was safe and silent. Thomas sat in the legal aid office and read each letter aloud to his mother over the phone, his voice breaking. She wept on the other end, but for the first time, they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of release. The investigation widened. The buyers who had purchased pieces of land from Chidi were informed that their transactions were fraudulent. Some were victims themselves, having paid in good faith. Others vanished, unwilling to be associated with the case. Thomas worked with the lawyer Adalby to negotiate settlements for those who were innocent, offering to honor their purchases on paper only once the land was wholly in the family's name, a detail that showed the difference between a man who built and a man who stole. Thomas was not there to destroy, he was there to restore. 1 month after the arrest, Thomas stood on the Abakaliki Road plot with a legitimate architect, a site engineer, and a freshly approved building plan. The first load of sand arrived that afternoon, and Mr. Emeka, the retired bricklayer, came out of retirement to supervise the foundation. He placed his hand on Thomas's shoulder and said, "This one will stand. I will make sure of it." Neoma sat under a rented canopy, watching the work with proud, wet eyes. Her missing wedding ring, discovered to have been sold by Chidi for a fraction of its value, was replaced by a new band that Thomas had bought with the first money he saved after arriving home. He slid it onto her finger and said, "This one will never leave your hand." She pulled him close, and they held each other as the first block was laid, heavy and square and true. The story of Thomas Okonkwo traveled far. It reached the Nigerian diaspora community online, then local newspapers, then a television station that sent a crew to film the construction. Strangers donated furniture, tiles, a borehole pump. What had been stolen by family was restored by strangers who believed in the power of a son who refused to let go. Thomas did not seek revenge. He sought justice. And in the process, he taught everyone watching one unshakable truth: trust is not a blood right. It must be built, brick by brick, with eyes wide open. And the people who truly love you will never ask you to build in the dark. The house on Abakaliki Road was never just a building. It was the shape of a promise, the weight of a son's sacrifice, and the proof that distance does not break a bond. But it was also a mirror reflecting a painful truth that extends far beyond one family in Enugu. Across the diaspora, countless people send money home, trusting relatives, friends, and institutions to turn hope into shelter. They work double shifts in foreign cities, believing their sweat is transforming into bricks, medicine, and dignity for the people they left behind. And too often, they never see the cracks until the structure collapses. The question Thomas faced was not only about justice, it was about whether betrayal by blood cuts deeper than betrayal by strangers. He chose not to let fury devour him, but he also refused to let love be an excuse for silence. That balance is not easy. Many would have walked away from the legal battle, drowning in shame or exhaustion. Thomas walked forward, carrying evidence, witnesses, and a mother who had been hidden in a shed. He proved that forgiveness does not mean erasing the crime, and that holding family accountable is not betrayal. It is love with a backbone. What would you have done if you discovered a cousin you trusted had stolen nearly 100,000 pounds and left your widowed mother cooking over kerosene? Would you still call him family? Or would you draw a line that no blood tie can cross? The answer reveals not just your character, but your understanding of what protection really means. Parents like Neoma do not ask for mansions. They ask for a roof that does not leak, a door that locks, and a child who remembers them. When that trust is broken, the rebuild must start with truth. Thomas's story ends with the foundation being laid, but the lesson never ends. Trust is not a gift you give blindly. It is a bridge you inspect regularly, no matter who built it. And the strongest families are not the ones that never face betrayal. They are the ones that face it together, with courage and clarity, refusing to let a thief rewrite their story. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you believe that loyalty should never be confused with silence, subscribe now for more true stories that reveal the extraordinary strength hidden in ordinary people.